All right. Very, very encouraging to see all of you out here on a Friday night. Dave and I appreciate all of your being here. If you would open up for the second session, we'll be in Matthew 24 to start. You get Matthew chapter 24. Now that we've, and I'm on page 7 in the notebook, if you're following along in the notebook. I'm on page 7. Now that we've defined the day of the Lord, what we did in the first session is we looked at the two views. All right? We told you that our belief is that the second view, as you see up there, is the correct one. Okay? By the way, if you hadn't noticed, there's full color charts in the back of your binder of the same chart that's on. I should have said that before, but oh well. You just found it as a little bonus. You were looking through there. So now that we've defined the nature of the day of the Lord, now that we've looked at the background, we've defined it, we've looked at the characteristics of it, now what we're ready to do, what we're going to move on into this time is look at some things related to the timing of it. Okay? So, in this study we want to demonstrate that the day of the Lord comes to earth with the second coming of Christ, and therefore does not include the 70th week of Daniel or the tribulation period in the day of the Lord. Now remember, we said that the day of the Lord is the day when the Lord alone is exalted. We said it's defined by His presence. We said that it's a day when He deals with and destroys His enemies, that He establishes His kingdom, that He reigns as King over all the earth, that He stands upon the Mount of Olives. We went through all of that stuff in the last study. Now what we want to do is look at the timing. Now Matthew 24 is going to be, you folks that were here on Sunday, kind of are going to be a little bit an advantage because a few of the things that I'm going to say here are going to be related to what we began talking about in the Sunday morning service last time about the Olivet Discourse. If you will look at Matthew chapter 24 verse 3, you see that the apostles come to Christ. Mark tells us specifically that it's Peter, James, John, and Andrew. But Matthew chapter 24 verse 3 it says, "And as they sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to Him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of Thy coming and of the end of the world?" So what do they want to know? They want to know, number one, when's the temple going to be destroyed? And then they want to know, what's the sign of Thy coming and the end of the world? In verse 3. Now notice verse 4. "And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many." Okay? So, when he sets out to answer their question here, and he sets out to tell them the answer to what shall be the sign of Thy coming and of the end of the world, the first thing he tells them is that they need to be aware of false what? False Christ that shall come, in verse 5. Okay? Now, ultimately, we know and understand that there will be one main false Christ, or the individual that the Scripture identifies as Antichrist. Okay? So there's a warning here. He warns them that the first sign of the end of the world and it's the sign of Thy coming and of the end of the world is related to the rising of false Christ. Hold your hand there and come over to Daniel chapter 9. Come over to Daniel chapter 9. Now there's a reason why we're going to do this, and hopefully by the time we're done, you'll understand why we did it the way we did it. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. Now the tribulation, the 70th week of Daniel. Okay? The tribulation period has a very definite beginning point. Okay? Look with me at verse 27. "And he," well, who's the he? Go back to verse 26. "And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself." Notice. "And the people of the prince that shall what? Shall come. Shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with the flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined, and he shall confirm the covenant with many." How long? For 1 week. Okay? Now by the time you get to verse 27, how many weeks are left in the prophecy? Just one. So what we have is we have one time period here, okay, or 1 week And this whole thing is going to be 7 years. It's going to be divided 3.5 and 3.5. And this whole thing is known as the 70th what? Week. Now notice what it says there in verse 27. It says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many, how long? 1 week. So what is it, folks, that starts the counting of this 70th week? It's the signing of a covenant between the prince that shall come here, the Antichrist, and the nations in which Israel is involved in this. Look at verse 27. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease for the overspreading of abominations. He shall make it desolate even until the consummation. And that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. So, the thing, folks, that starts the counting here, the 70th week of Daniel, the tribulation period, is the signing of this covenant. When that covenant is signed, it says for how long? 1 week. 1 week of years in this case. So we have a time period here of 7 years. Okay? Now, come with me to Daniel chapter 7. Now, we're not going to read all of Daniel chapter 7 from verses 1 to 25 because we don't have time. So look with me at verse 22. No, verse 21. And I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. And the time came that the saints should possess what? Verse 23. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all the kingdoms, shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another after them. And he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kingdoms. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given unto his hand until a times, and a dividing of time. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Now, this little horn that Daniel's talking about here, this is what individual? This is the Antichrist. This is the one that is going to go out and going to establish a kingdom, a confederation of 10 nations that are going to align themselves against the nation of Israel here. Come with me to chapter 8. Daniel chapter 8, look at verse 23. And in the latter time of their kingdoms, when the transgressors are come to a full, notice, a king of fierce countenance, and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also, he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall do what? Destroy many. And he also shall stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. Who's that talking about? That's talking about this guy right here. Okay? He's going to make war with the saints. He's going to do all the things there that is talked about. And when the Lord returns, he's going to do what to him? He's going to destroy him. Okay? Come with me to Daniel chapter 11. Notice, flip back quickly. Notice again, how does he do this? It says, by peace he shall do what? Destroy many. What happened in Daniel 9:27? The covenant is what? Signed. The covenant that's signed begins the counting of this 70th week. Okay? In the middle of this week, as we'll see in a minute, he's going to turn on Israel. And we'll get through that stuff here in a few minutes. Now, we could go to Daniel chapter 11 and see it again. Daniel chapter 11, look at verse 21. Again, folks, there's a lot more detail here. I mean, we can spend a whole conference just teaching Daniel 7 and 8. Daniel chapter 11, look at verse 21. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in how? Peaceably, and obtain the kingdom by what? Flatteries. So this individual, go back with me to Matthew. Go back with me to Matthew 24. It's interesting, in you don't have to turn there, but in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, he talks about, when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden what? See, these folks think they're living in a time period of peace and what? Safety. And when they think they're in that time period, then sudden what? Destruction is going to hit them. Okay? And this guy, he's going to obtain the kingdom by flatteries. We read a verse last Sunday in Psalms where it talks about that his words were smoother than what? Butter. But in his heart was what? War. And his words were swords and all that sort of thing. Okay? So this individual, Matthew chapter 24, this person, look at Matthew 24, verse 5, For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. We just studied all these things Sunday morning, okay? For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. Then shall the end be. No. It says all these things are what?
Beginning of sorrow.
Okay, so false Christ, war, rumors of war, famine, pestilence, earthquake, all those things, he says, they're what? The beginning of sorrows. Okay? Look at Matthew 24, verse 15. And when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Verse 16, then let them which be in Judea do what?
Read.
So when they see the abomination of desolation, what are they supposed to do? Well, now I have a question. When does the abomination of desolation occur? Come with me back to Daniel chapter 9, look at verse 27 again. Should have told you to mark it, I apologize. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. Notice, Daniel 9:27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many how long? Notice, and in the midst of the week, what's the midst? The middle, right? In the midst of the week, he shall do what? Cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Why? For the overspreading of abominations. Now flip back with me. Now when does that happen according to Daniel? That's going to happen in the middle of the week. So in the middle of the week, according to Daniel, the abomination of desolation is going to occur, right? Now go back with me to Matthew 24, look at verse 15 again. Jesus tells them that when they see the abomination of desolation spoken by who? Daniel the prophet. Well, when did Daniel the prophet say the abomination of desolation would occur? In the middle of the week. So Israel knows that when they see that, where are they? Beginning of sorrows? Or in the middle? When they see that, they know it's time to get out of town. He says, flee where? Into the mountains, okay? So we see, in Matthew 24, we see the beginning of sorrows, and we see what's going to happen where? In the middle. Come with me now to verse 22. Look at verse 22. Well, verse 16. Then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. So, again, what causes them to flee? When they see the abomination of desolation, right? So when they see that, it's time for them to flee. And they know, based on the book of Daniel, that happens when? In the middle of the week, right? Verse 17, let him that is in the housetop not come down, and so on. Verse 22, and except those days be what? Shortened, there shall no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be what? Shortened. Folks, this is not, look at the points here now on page 7. This does not refer to days being reduced from 24 hours to 23 hours. That's not what it means. Okay? Or the Lord Jesus Christ returning prior to the end of the 70th week. Hold your hand here and come over to Psalm chapter 102. Come to Psalm 102. Psalm 102, look at verse 23. Interesting verse. Psalm 102, verse 23. He weakened my strength in the way. He shortened my what? Days. I said, oh my God, take me not away in the midst of my days. The years are throughout all generations. So to shorten the days of a man's life, in that verse, is to cause his life to come to a premature what? End. Okay? Look at Psalm 89. Psalm 89, verse 45. The days of his youth hast thou shortened. Thou hast covered him with shame. So what is it to shorten the days of a man's life? Is to cause his life to come to a premature end, right? So, go back to Matthew 24 now. Go back to Matthew 24. When it says this in verse 22, look at it again. Matthew 24, verse 22. Tell you to mark stuff, and then I don't do it. Matthew 24, verse 22. Look at it again. And except those days be what? See, in other words, if God allowed this thing to come all the way out to the end, no one's going to what? Survive. No one's going to survive. So, look at what else it says. Verse 22. Except these days should be shortened, there shall no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be what? Shortened. So for the sake of believing Israel, for the sake of the elect, the believing remnant, is God going to shorten the 70th week by an unspecified amount of time? That's what it says. Okay? This explains, look at verse 21. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time. No, nor ever shall be. Now, I don't know if you ever thought about that verse. But did God destroy the whole earth through a flood? Yes. But that verse says that these days, look at verse 21 again, for then shall be great tribulation, for was not since the beginning of the world to this time, never, nor ever shall be. The fact that these days, look at my point there, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, I apologize. This explains how the tribulation is worse than the flood. The flood ran its natural course. And 8 people were able to do what? Survive. If the tribulation were allowed to run its natural course, no one would what? Survive. So what does God do? He cuts it short. Okay? That's what the verse says. Look at verse 27. Now just read verse 27. For as lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, so shall also what? So now where are we at in verse 27? Verse 27 takes us to what event? The second coming. Okay? Verse 27 takes us to the second coming. So, in verses 1 through 7, we saw the beginning of what? Sorrows. In verses 15 and following, we saw the abomination of desolation, Israel going in the wilderness to flee. He tells them that unless those days be shortened, there should no flesh survive, but He's going to shorten them for the sake of the elect. Right? Now in verse 27 of Matthew 24, we see the second coming of Christ, the sign of the second coming of Christ in heaven. Verse 27, For as lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Verse 28, For wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. Now, please look at verse 29. What are the first two words of verse 29? Immediately. What? After. Immediately after what?
Tribulation.
Immediately after the tribulation of those days. Shall the sun be what?
Darkened.
So the sun is going to be darkened. When? Immediately when? After the tribulation of those days. Read the rest of the verse. Shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not what? So I'm just going to abbreviate that. The moon is not going to give her light. Okay? And the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be what? So are there cosmic disturbances that occur when? Immediately when? After. So does Matthew 24 show you the beginning of sorrows, the middle, the abomination of desolation, and what happens immediately after the end of the tribulation?
Yes.
Everybody with that? Okay, now, go back. Verse 30. So verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, the powers of heaven shall be shaken. What are the first two words of verse 30? And then. So, in other words, after what? After the sun is darkened, after the moon stops shining, when the stars fall from heaven, and so the sign of the Son of Man's coming happens after this, and this happens after the tribulation. All you got to do is read the verse. Right? Verse 30, and then, after the cosmic disturbance, in verse 29, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn and see the Son of Man doing what? Coming. So, it's very important here, okay? The tribulation runs its course and is shortened by an undisclosed amount of time in this particular passage, okay? Immediately after, the sun doesn't shine, the moon doesn't give her light, the stars fall from heaven, all these things happen, and after that is what? The sign of the Son of Man coming, and the people of the earth see Him what? See Him coming. So you have, in Matthew 24, you have the beginning of sorrows, you have the middle of the week, the midst of the week, then you have immediately after the tribulation of those days, you have the cosmic disturbance after the tribulation and before what? The second coming. Everybody with that? All you got to do is read the verse. Okay? Now, look at the second bullet point on page 8 of the notebook. Matthew 24, 29 through 30. After the tribulation of those days, certain cosmic disturbances will occur. Then they shall see the Son of Man coming. Matthew 24 takes his readers through the entire 70th week of Daniel in summary form. Okay? Now, come with me to Malachi chapter 4. Before the great and dreadful day of the Lord comes, who has to be sent? Malachi chapter 4, look at verse 5. Malachi chapter 4, verse 5. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet. What's the next word? Before what? The coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. So before the great and dreadful day of the Lord comes, who's going to be sent? Elijah the prophet. Okay? Hold your hand there and come with me over to Revelation chapter 11. Now, Elijah is commonly viewed and commonly understood by dispensational interpreters of all different persuasions as being one of the two witnesses during the book of Revelation. Okay? Revelation chapter 11, verse 6. Now, before we read this, I just have a question. Do we have a clear verse in Malachi that Elijah is going to be sent before the great day of the Lord what? Comes. Revelation chapter 11, verse 3. And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth, and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them in this manner, he must in this manner, be killed. These have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. What did Elijah do in the Old Testament? He prayed that it wouldn't what? Now here's one of these two witnesses doing what? Same exact thing. Verse 6. These have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over the waters to turn them into blood. Who did that? Moses. To smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will, and so on. And they will, verse 7, and when they have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. Now, it's commonly understood, folks, that Elijah and Moses testify during the first half of the tribulation. Now, in Malachi chapter 4, verse 5 says that, why don't you go back and read it? Malachi chapter 4, verse 5, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before what? Now think about it. If Elijah and Moses minister here during the first half of the tribulation, and they have to minister before the great and notable day of the Lord can come, then what do I know about the first half of the tribulation? It's not the day of the Lord. Why? Because they got to be sent before and what? Before it can come. So now I know that the first half at least cannot be called the day of the Lord, because these men have to be sent before it can what? Is everybody following that? Now, come with me, look at Joel. Let's come over to Joel chapter 2. Get Joel 2 in one hand and Matthew 24 in the other. Matthew 24 in one hand and Joel 2 in the other. Alright, let's do Joel 2 first. Joel chapter 2, verse 31. Okay. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood. What's the next word? Before the great and terrible day of the Lord, what? So before the day of the Lord can come, the sun be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before it what? Now what did Matthew 24 tell us about when that happens? Immediately. Go back to Matthew 24, look at verse 29, immediately what? After the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man where? Okay, so what do I know then? I know that Elijah the prophet has to be sent before the great noble day of the Lord what? I know that the sun is going to be turned into darkness, the moon into blood, and so forth, before the day of the Lord what? So now I know that not only is the first half of the tribulation, but neither is the second half of the tribulation, called what? Now what did we say the day of the Lord was in the first study? The presence of who? The Lord. That you cannot have the day of the Lord until you have the Lord's presence. Well, when does the Lord come back? Bang, right there. It is false to say that the entire tribulation is the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord, now I'm getting ahead of myself. Go look at, get two passages. Get Acts chapter 1 and Zechariah chapter 14. Acts chapter 1. And Zechariah 14. Now look. Have we been playing any tricky games or funny business with the verses here? All we've been doing is just what? Elijah the prophet is going to be sent before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Elijah ministers during the first half of the tribulation. Therefore I know this can't be what? The day of the Lord. Matthew 24 says that immediately following the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and so on and so forth. Joel 2 tells me that before the day of the Lord comes, the sun's going to be darkened, the moon's not going to shine. Therefore I know that if this happens after the tribulation, but before the day of the Lord comes, then nothing before that can be included in the day of the Lord. Right. Then you take into account what we've already studied, that the day of the Lord is the presence of the Lord, that it's the day when the Lord destroys His enemies. Then we know that the day of the Lord cannot come to earth until when? Because Matthew 24 also says that immediately following these cosmic disturbances, then they see the sign of the Son of Man coming. I hope you're following that. Acts chapter 2, verse 11. I'm sorry. Acts 1:11. Which also you men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, which is taken up from you, shall come in like manner as ye have seen Him go where? Into heaven. Well, where did He, verse 12, and they return unto Jerusalem from where? So where did He ascend up from? And they're told that He's going to come in exactly like manner as He what? He's going to come back, in the exact same manner that He what? Went up. Come back to Zechariah chapter 14, look at verse 19. Verse 4. Chapter 14, verse 4. Zechariah 14, verse 4. You should probably read verse 1 first. Behold, when the day of the Lord cometh, verse 4, and His feet shall stand in that day. And when's that going to happen? In the day of what? So He is set over here. He ascends up into heaven off the Mount of Olives. Over here, when He comes back to the Mount of Olives. And the passage explicitly says that it's in the day of the Lord when that what? When that happens. So therefore I know that none of the tribulation period can rightfully be called the day of the Lord, scripturally. I hope you're following this, okay? Because all we're doing is drawing on the board what the verses are saying, okay? Now, come with me to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Remember what we said, folks. To have the day of the Lord, you have to have what? If I spelled presence wrong, you'll forgive me for not being able to spell and write at the same time. Okay? Or talk and write at the same time. So, the day of the Lord then is defined as the presence of the Lord, and it's the day when the Lord alone is what? Exalted. Did we learn that last session? Okay. Question. Is that happening here? Is that happening here? Where's that happen? Right there. And the timing of that is after the cosmic disturbance, after the tribulation. When the Lord has His presence where? So when He comes down, stands on that Mount of Olives, and He ushers forth that army to go after the boys, the kingdom's going to be established. The Satan is bound. You're going to have the great white throne, and then finally you're going to have the new heavens and the new earth out here. And we already said that all of that is included in what? The day of the Lord. Now look with me as we wrap this up. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3. Let no man deceive you by any means. For that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is who? Hey, what's the abomination of desolation? This is that verse right there. That man of sin, son of perdition, he's going to go up into that temple in the middle of that tribulation. He's going to sit himself down on the top of that mercy seat between the cherubim, and he's going to say, I'm God, worship me. Verse 5, remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things? Now please watch verse 6. And now ye know what withholdeth. That he is referring to the man of sin, the son of perdition in the context. That he might be revealed in his what? Time. This time. This is not the day of the Lord. This is the day of the adversary. This is the day of the Antichrist. Because the Lord alone is not being exalted here. The Antichrist is exalting himself as God. Therefore, by our definition of what the day of the Lord was in the first study, we know that this cannot be what? Because is God alone being exalted here? Is God present? Is this the presence of the Lord here? No. It's the exact opposite. It's the day of the adversary when he has his time and exalts himself as God and demands that man worship him as God. So let's look at the summary here. There are three conclusive reasons that the day of the Lord cannot come to earth prior to the second coming. Okay? First, it cannot occur until after the tribulation and the cosmic disturbances that follow the tribulation. And there are your verses. Matthew 24, Joel 2, and Revelation 6. Second, it cannot include the tribulation on earth because the beast is exalted during that time. And third, the day of the Lord is the presence of the Lord. Thus, the day of the Lord comes when the Lord Jesus Christ Himself arrives and cannot begin prior to His physical presence. So, when does the day of the Lord come? Right there. From there on, all the way out, who alone is exalted? Who alone is present? Who's exalted here? This is His time, Paul says. When He has His day and exalts Himself as God and demands that man worship Him as such, take His beat, numbered, blah, 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 all that stuff in the book of Revelation. So let me be clear. The day of the Lord comes at the second coming of Christ. It does not include the events of the tribulation. Now, the next objection somebody would raise is, what about the verses where it says that the day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night? 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, Brother Dave Reed is going to talk to you about that. So I'm sorry, you're just going to have to come back to get the rest of it. Okay? Does anybody have any questions or comments about the second study? Does everybody understand what we just did here? I hope you follow what we did and why we did it based on the verses, and how the definition and the character of the day of the Lord from the first study affects and impacts how you understand when this day comes. Okay? Sarah?
Zechariah 14:1 says, "Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of the east." What does that mean, the spoil be divided?
To divide the spoils, like to take the spoils of war. It's a term about taking the spoil of war and dividing it. It's all alluding to this. All these verses we read about the warfare, the day of battle, and the Lord leading His army, and all that stuff is all what that's alluding to.
What is the term bathed in heaven? His sword is bathed in heaven. What does that mean?
I'm glad you asked that, because we're going to answer that tomorrow too. Yeah.
Bryan, last time I saw this together, read Revelation, it looks like verse 19 of Revelation is the day of the Lord.
Read chapter 19.
Chapter 19. But after that is the great white throne.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that happens in this time. He comes back, he executes His wrath, He judges the nations, Satan is bound, the millennial kingdom is established, Satan is loosed. There's a lot of things that we don't have on here, but they fit into the day of the Lord because A, the Lord is present, B, the Lord alone is being exalted, and C, they fit within the timing up here between when He returns and the new heavens and the new earth that are clearly identified as occurring in the day of the Lord by 2 Peter. Sure.
Okay, I got the second coming, and then you got the cosmic thing before that, and then way before that, the Antichrist is taking over. What happened to the 3.5 years?
Where?
The middle. The middle.
What happens here?
Yeah.
A lot of stuff. Okay? And it's going to have something to do with what Ernie's bringing up about his sword being bathed in heaven. a bunch of stuff happens in the middle here. But one of the things that happens in the middle is this abomination of desolation is set up. And literally, I believe what happens is the man of sin literally goes into the temple and says, like Paul's talking about 2 Thessalonians 2, and says, I'm God, worship me.
But isn't it sometimes God shortens the days so don't suffer?
I would say those are shortened off at the end somewhere out here. Because Israel suffers great suffering during this 3.5 years here. Okay. Now, we'll be filling in some more details on this sort of roughly drawn chart, throughout the rest of the weekend. But what have we seen so far tonight? We've defined the day of the Lord. Let's back up. I presented you 2 views. I said there are 2 views that are out there. Okay? We defined the nature and character of the day of the Lord in the first study. Then the second study, we looked at the timing of when that day comes. And we did that based on Matthew 24, Daniel chapter 9, and all of the stuff we studied in the first study about the nature and character of the day of the Lord, Joel 2 and Malachi chapter 4. To understand what's going on there, right?
During that 70th week, has Israel converted and acknowledged Jesus Christ as King?
Some of them.
Just a little bit.
The remnant of believing Israel that understands what's going on.
So the covenant is just confirmed with national Israel.
National Israel. Yes. Frank?
Elijah and Moses appear 1,000 days before the day of the Lord, which will put you aware right after the middle of the week or right before the middle of the week.
It doesn't say that. It says they testify for a number of days. Where you start counting those, most interpreters understand that they testify during the first half. Okay. Any premillennial commentary is pretty much going to take that view. That's when you look at the nature of their ministry. You look at the clear verse about the second coming of Elijah, and you look at what's going on. That's why they're understood to be Moses and Elijah. And if they have to testify, if Elijah has to come back before the great notable day of the Lord comes again, then I know that the day of the Lord cannot be associated with the first half. I know it can't be associated with the second half because this happens before the great notable day of the Lord comes, and Matthew 24 tells me that this happens after this. Okay? Alright, I hope we're not digging a hole with the questions. Yeah.
So when Elijah's here, he's going to be preaching,
Yes.
much like John the Baptist did. And that's what's going to be causing repentance among a remnant of Israel.
That's part of it, and it's also going to engender extreme hatred against them from the enemies of Israel. They're going to wish them dead. They're going to kill them in the street, like dance and say it's the best day of ever. Okay. Yes, sir.
Isn't the purpose of the tribulation to really purge out Israel? I mean, to really purge it out. So then I would think if that, then those two witnesses would have to come prior to this, because they would be prophesying to Israel, not to everybody else, right?
I definitely see them as being the first half.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And so
Well-
those converts are going to flee to the mountains when the abomination
It's the believing remnant in Israel that's going to flee into the mountains. And they will be cared for just like Israel was during their wanderings in the wilderness and during the Exodus. God will supernaturally provide for them out there during that time. But the Antichrist is coming after them. All right, Sarah.
I thought I remembered on Sunday us reading some verses that said that here?
That's at the end here. That's Revelation 6, the sixth seal. When they see the sign of the Son of Man in heaven.
So will they be kind of joined with the remnant as well? I mean, is the remnant still going to be in the mountain? Or?
It's getting... they will be on earth to see the sign of the Son of Man coming. And remember that if this is allowed to run out to its natural end, no one would what? Survive. Therefore, this is worse than the flood, because the flood did go out to its natural end, and 8 people did survive. 8 or 6. 8.
Okay,
So,
What is the sign of the Son of Man?
His lightning cometh out of the east.
Is this the light of Christ himself?
And I think so, based on his lightning cometh out of the east and shineth unto the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. And what was the question they asked him in Matthew 24, verse 3 or 4? They said, what shall be the sign of thy what? Of thy coming. So he tells them what the sign of his coming is going to be and when he's going to come. He's coming when? Immediately after the tribulation of those days. After this is going to happen, and then he's going to come. And then the other verses tell you that this is when the day of the Lord comes. So, tomorrow we are going to start at 9 o'clock in the morning. Okay? So if you want a breakfast snack, a bagel, what have you, cream cheese, if you want to bring something, please do that. Don't forget that we're asking for $5 to help pay for pizza tomorrow. You can give that money to either myself or Wayne, and we will make sure that it gets to the appropriate person. So tomorrow morning, Dave is going to start talking about the day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night. Then we have another 2 more morning sessions. I'm going to do both of those. Then Dave is going to take one afternoon session after lunch, and then we'll be done. Then we'll come back tomorrow, Sunday morning, during the adult Sunday school hour. Dave is going to teach a final Day of the Lord related lesson. And then Dave is going to preach Sunday morning, the main study Sunday morning. Okay, so that's the schedule for the rest of the weekend. Okay? So go home, get some sleep, come back bright and early at 9 o'clock, ready to go again. Thanks for coming.